as a youngster, we would run up and down the stairs to grandmothers and great aunts, and I sat. The seats, as you mentioned, were not particularly assigned, but people had seats that they were accustomed to using, so that was their seat. And I often would sit with my great uncle, Sam Garshowitz, and it was on the right side of the shul. And he was a Cohen.
Oh. Hold on.
The Garshowitz men were Kohanim.
What did the Kohanim do?
They were duchen,
What is that?
the priestly blessing. Not on Sabbath, on holidays.
What did they do? What is the priestly blessing? Describe it.
The priests are Kohanim, and the Levies would wash their feet before they duchen. That's what the Levies served the priests. That's the tradition. Now, I don't know if they actually washed them or they just took off their socks. But when the Kohanim duchen, they took off their shoes and they were in their sock feet. And they usually wore a large tallis, and they pulled it over their heads, and there'd be 2 or 3 of them, depends how many Kohanim there were available, and they would do the priestly blessing of the congregation.
How did that go over?
Well, it was Orthodox. It was, you only did it on holidays. I don't think they did it on Sabbath. They did it on the holidays.
Do you know why they stopped?
Because they became conservative. I don't know why they moved to conservative, but they did.
Do you remember when they moved to Aberdeen?
I recall it, but I couldn't particularly put a timeline on it. But my mother was on the Chevra Kadisha, and up at Beth Jacob on Aberdeen, sometimes they were called on to wash the bodies, and it was done at shul because we didn't really have a funeral home. It was until later years that they had the funeral home on Vine Street.
So was the Chevra Kadisha in Beth Jacob?
Yeah.
They washed the bodies in Beth Jacob?
That's my recollection. Maybe not in the shul.
In the basement.
Do you recall?
In the basement. No, I remember when Mum would come home. She would be...
My grandmother was on the Chevra Kadisha, my mother's mother.
Well, Goldie Robbins talked about that she had a family tradition. Goldie Robbins is in your family, right?
Yeah. She's was a Garshowitz.
And if I were living in Hamilton, I probably would have been a member also.
So, can you speak to that can you talk a bit about the Chevra Kadisha and your family connection to the Chevra Kadisha?
Well, the family connection is that there are duties that women do, and some men attend to duties that refer to men. Now, I don't really know which men were. I think, I'm trying to think which one of the men folk. See, I don't think the Kohanim would touch dead bodies. But one thing, when Goldie got married, we wanted to have round tables for the wedding reception. We borrowed them from Addis Israel on Cannon Street because they had round tables.
What was the relationship between the Cannon Street Shul and the Hunter Street Shul? Friendly?
Well, on the holidays, the teenagers would gravitate from one to the other.
Yeah, I forgot to say that.
I've heard of it. Was there a rivalry?
There was sort of snobbery.
It was a reform one on the other side of the tracks.
Cannon Street Shul was the Polish Shul. That was the coarse Jews, and the refined Jews were at Beth Jacob or at Anshe Sholem.
So
Rabbi Fackenheim Yeah. Was it famous along this?
My recollection, I think we had Harold Minden was the principal of the Sunday school, and the auditorium had the classrooms surrounding the auditorium. So we would go in, and Mrs. Japman was my teacher, and her son was my boyfriend, and David Robinson was her brother, and he was in civil life. He was one time he was the chair of the Board of Education in Hamilton. David Robinson.
What was your Jewish education like? Was it a good education?
Ad hoc. Chazan Levinson taught me, and because I wasn't in reading it, we had it translated. But Chazan Levinson taught me the notes, etc., and we rehearsed.
Tell me about Cantor Levinson.
Well, I like he had a splendid voice, and of course I was 12, 13, so he was an old guy as far as he wouldn't have been that old, but to a 13-year-old he'd be an old guy.
What did you learn in Sunday school?
Jacob and Joseph and the Moses, the children exiting Egypt.
Did you behave in Sunday school?
I think in Sunday school I did, but not in the balcony. I guess as youngsters, our big deal was when the men were getting snuff, the kids would run around and see if they could get some snuff, and they would schmeck tabik.
Little girls didn't do that.
What is that, what you just said?
Smell the tobacco, snuff.
It was supposed to be spices.
No, it was snuff, I think, for...
What is snuff?
Snuff is tobacco. I think on Yom Kippur you couldn't eat, so to reduce the hunger pangs, they would smoke snuff.
You see in antique stores in the snuff box.
And then you would take that up to the women's section?
Well, we wouldn't take it up, but we'd have it on our hand. In fact, in the military, they still use snuff in the officers' mess.
Right. Show how.
Put a little...
And then you'd sneeze.
Then you'd give a big sneeze.
Looks like cocaine.
It's addictive.
It's addictive?
Well, when you're addicted, it got... I don't think too many Jewish men did it, but among the non-Jewish, they chewed snuff. And that's what spittoons were for.
Right. Tell me about the spittoons. Somebody told me there's spittoons in the Hunter Street Shul. Were there?
I think there were.
There were.
What were spittoons for?
If you took too deep a snuff of snuff, you'd sneeze and maybe spit. So they had to spit in the spittoon, not on the floor.